the war in Afghanistan spanned 20 years and 4 presidents, but much of what's happening now can be traced to some recent decisions. Earlier this year, for example, President Biden pledged to withdraw all troops from Afghanistan by the end of this month. And on Monday, the president addressed the nation and defended his position.
I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces.
The Taliban surge to power caught the U.S. off guard. U.S. intelligence, as recently as last week, simply underestimated the speed of the takeover. Here's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley.
There was nothing that I or anyone else saw that indicated a collapse of this army and this government in 11 days.
Vivian, your reporting showed that an internal State Department memo last month warned the administration that the Taliban takeover was imminent and that the Afghan military may be unable to stop it. So were those warnings simply ignored?
The State Department asserts that they weren't ignored, that Secretary of State Blinken received the memo immediately. He welcomed the feedback. But what they did about it is the question. These diplomats, about 24 in total, really emphasized that the situation is growing dire. The Afghan military is not up to the task. They're not stopping they're not able to stop the advance of the Taliban. And so the government needed to act quickly to get these Afghans out, as well as Americans out. And they said, by August 1st, we need to start mass evacuations, otherwise we're in trouble.
Well, the president said today, yeah, we get a lot of advice, and this was just one sort of option.
He was very dismissive about it, and that's one of the issues right now is, we're going to be going back now and showing what they knew and when they knew it to understand whether or not they had the time to act and whether or not they could have mitigated some of the chaos that we're seeing now on the ground. Of course, Peter Bergen was just talking about babies being carried over the walls of the airport to rush them out because people are so desperate to get out now. Some of that chaos that we see outside the airport probably could have been eased had we started moving people out in greater number earlier than when the Taliban was actually standing at the gates of the airport.
Peter Baker, is there a certain factor here that the president just made up his mind and then whatever anybody said didn't shake him from his position?
Yeah, if you talk to Democrats, that's what they think. You had a president here who made up his mind really in 2009, back when he was Barack Obama's vice president, and they debated what to do about Afghanistan. He took the position even back then of a lighter footprint, basically beginning the idea of pulling out. So I think he has been eager and anxious to do this for about a decade. And he was set on doing it. And I think he was set on doing it regardless of what General Milley or any of the others might have warned him about in terms of a collapse. And you've heard him say this week repeatedly that the fact that the Taliban came to power, whether it came in 11 days or 30 days or 90 days, he anticipated that and basically has no problem with that, or at least was willing to make that sacrifice in order to get out, that he was going to get out regardless of whether or not it empowered the Taliban to take over the country, because he decided that the war wasn't worth fighting anymore, that in fact we weren't really making any progress and it was time to get out. So I think you're right, he was already set on this. How much he listened to the people around him is a question that will be explored, I think, increasingly through hearings and other reporting and investigations in the days and weeks to come.
So let's focus in a little bit more on the immediate period. This week, Ann's colleagues at the Washington Post compiled a TikTok of President Biden's weekend at Camp David and the 72 hours that shaped the president's response to this crisis. So what do we know about what unfolded in the White House over the weekend, and how has President Biden justified his handling of this?
Well, I think the answer to how he's justified it is that he felt compelled to speak again on Monday and then speak again today and interrupt his vacation a couple of times. They know at the White House that the optics, as they like to say, are not good here. Anytime you have the kind of the scenes of chaos, sobbing, heartbreak, mayhem that surround the airport that are being televised everywhere this week, as the president said today, it's heartbreaking, but he keeps coming back to the same main point, which is that this war is no longer in the United States' interest, in his view. And the longer Americans are on the ground in Afghanistan, the more risk to those Americans. And he said, I think 3 times this week, how long would you have me stay? version of that. How many more Americans would you have me put at risk? And that is the crux of his argument. And as angry as he has been at the way this is all played out, as frustrated as many White House officials are, they just keep circling back to, we made our decision because it's in the U.S. interest and we're sticking to it. And it's pretty unapologetic.
So they're basically saying this will pass.
They are counting on a couple of things here, including overwhelming public opinion that says that, and consistent public opinion that says that pulling out from Afghanistan is the right thing.
Well, it fell, of course, to the Taliban just 4 weeks before the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks. In an interview with George Stephanopoulos of ABC News, President Biden explained why the U.S. military went to Afghanistan in the first place.
We went there for two reasons, George. Two reasons. One, to get bin Laden, and two, to wipe out as best we could, and we did, the al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. We did it. Then what happened? We decided to engage in nation building. That never made any sense to me.
So, Peter Bergen, this gets at the question that many Americans are asking. How did it come to this?
When you say this, meaning what?
To where we are now. In other words, who lost Afghanistan?
Oh my God, that is such a big question. I mean, let's start with President Obama announcing a withdrawal on December 1st, 2009 at West Point when he announced a surge of troops. I mean, this goes, we've been saying we're going to be leaving for a very long time. Then throw in Trump and his agreement, which was signed in February of 2020. We've been saying we're leaving for a long time. The Taliban aren't reading the newspaper, listening to the radio, watching TV. They've had a long time to plan for this, and then Biden just went through with this. And I think in a major unforced error. 2,500 troops. We have 1.3 million active duty troops, 2 million if you throw in the reserves. This was a very small and relatively small insurance policy that was, I think, politically sustainable in the United States, economically sustainable as well.
So, Vivian, what is the role of the Trump administration's decision to negotiate with the Taliban for the U.S. withdrawal? Is that, are we seeing the consequence of that, or could it have come out differently?
No, I mean, we're probably seeing the consequences of 2 decades of policy measures, probably. But the Trump administration decided that they believed a diplomatic solution was the best way. President Trump, as we all remember, was very keen on striking deals, and he believed that a peace deal, was the way to go in Afghanistan and was going to be the measure that's going to ensure that we could get our troops out. And so last year, his administration signed a deal with the Taliban that essentially agreed in for a number of things: A, peace talks, but also B, the release of 5,000 Taliban prisoners. And that has been the start of some of the concerns that we've seen now that possibly could have empowered them, given them a little bit of force and mobilization to get this, get their offensive that we saw in the last week or so going. We know commanders that have been involved in the takeover of cities in the last 10 days or so were some of the prisoners that were actually released as part of that deal. And so, of course, a lot of blame and a lot of questions spill over to administrations. We can't just blame one. But what's been so interesting is how this administration has been handling the Taliban. Is they've been very careful about not coming out and just full on blasting the Taliban for some of our past offenses. They've used very careful language with regard to them. They say, we hope that the Taliban of 2001 is not the Taliban of 2021 and that we can work together as partners. In fact, that cable that the diplomats sent asked the State Department to use harsher language when describing the Taliban to really expose some of their atrocities in the country. And so we don't know. Maybe they're doing it as a strategic thing. There are people Americans still on the ground in Afghanistan, so maybe they're just trying to play it cautiously until the August 31st deadline. Either way, they're trying to take this new tack with the Taliban.
They're actually negotiating with the Taliban on the ground now, which is something that we've never seen before. I mean, in theory, the peace negotiations are taking place in Doha. That's become completely irrelevant now. We now have American military commanders negotiating face-to-face.
Peter Baker, let me ask you this question about American public opinion, which the White House seems to be counting on, that A, Americans agree that we should be out of Afghanistan, and B, is the White House thinking that Americans don't really care much whether we get all the Afghan allies out?
Yeah, I think that's the cold calculation at the White House, which is that basically, as long as they get Americans out, that the Americans back at home won't care about whatever happens in Afghanistan from now on, that this will fade. These pictures will be unpleasant for a few days, but basically they'll go away, and Americans will, by the time they come back to the polls, won't be voting on foreign policy because there won't be any American stake seen in Afghanistan. And they have a point about that. You know, I looked through front pages of newspapers across the country in the last couple of days, and while this is obviously getting big play in the national media and the national networks, papers in, you know, cities like Phoenix and Fresno and Austin, they weren't putting this on the front page anymore. So you can make the argument, that's what they're making, is that Americans won't mind the fact that there was this chaotic, messy departure. But there's also another argument. The other argument is, and this is one that Republicans will no doubt try to take advantage of, is if it shows a lack of competence, if it plays into the notion or the indictment of President Biden as somebody who is in over his head or can't handle the job or in some ways has made America look weak on the international stage, that could be a problem for him politically going down the road. It may depend on other events, other factors to see if they play into that kind of a narrative. This by itself might not do it, but it doesn't help the president to have these pictures out there, because I think he'll see them again when we have future elections.